If I should say something about an African orientation, I would use the word African-centeredness. And the easiest way for me to explain it is that Africa is in the center of everything I talk about, everything that I have an aspiration towards, everything that drives me, every opinion that I have, every situation that I want to describe. I use African analogies, I use African proverbs, I center the African experience as the dominant one in whatever I see, talk about, describe, or have a conversation about. That doesn't mean that no other reality exists. There might be other things that I study, there might be other things that I'm watching a movie about, reading a book about, and I might want to reference that as well, but it's not the dominant experience. The dominant within my speech, within my orientation, within who I am and who I'm trying to present myself as, comes from this continent, comes from the experience that represent my people. And this is important to say because the African experience is not necessarily exactly the same to everyone. So for instance, we talk about white supremacy and racism. There are young people today who say they haven't experienced racism. They haven't been called racial names. They haven't been directly excluded from a place. They haven't been told to go away. They haven't been discriminated in a very harsh way. But this is where we need to understand that as Africans, we look at our experience as a collective. You don't have to wait until it comes to you. For the very fact that you belong to a people that have been marginalized, that has been discriminated, that is scripted as a people without knowledge, that affects you. That even if you don't have a personal experience with that, you know that if you were in another situation at another time, walking in somebody else's shoes, it would happen to you as well. So that means that you still need to speak from that experience. I'm saying this because some people say, since I haven't had a personal experience with racism, I'm not really going to talk about it. I'm not equipped to talk about it. Yes, you are, because you know what it's about. And even if you haven't experienced it, the moment a white person looks at you and gives you the impression that, what are you doing here? You know what's happening. You don't have to say, why are you looking at me? Do you know me from somewhere? You know exactly what it is, even if you haven't experienced it before. So it does exist in your worldview. It does exist as a potential situation that could pop up. And plus, we must also understand that racism is not based on individual experiences. It's based on a systematic approach to power. Some people then are seen and function in this world as powerful, others don't. And we know that we come in the latter category. We are not seen as people of power, and we don't see ourselves as power. We have become so used to this that we move in this world not really expecting to be powerful, not really expecting for other people and even ourselves to take us serious. So that has a lot to do with orientation. Where do I position power? Where do I position wealth, not just monetary wealth, but wealth in terms of rich culture, rich tapestry of philosophy, of thought, of things that are knowable. And obviously to be able to then carry and position yourself as having African orientation, you need to read, because just looking at African realities today is not necessarily a powerful experience. We see a lot of powerlessness, and you need to then understand that you come from a history that wasn't always like this, and you draw from that and you work towards bringing that richness back. One very important aspect of African knowledge is that it starts with self. Even in the inscriptions of ancient Kemetic or Egyptian tombs was the line, know thyself. So, and this is important to remind us of, because we often hear the notion that Africa is a collective space, is a collective culture. Self and individualism doesn't really exist. That's not necessarily the full truth. There is also a me within an understanding of African personality, but it's different than maybe the one we have gotten used to through Western knowledge, where the emphasis is very much on the me and I and the individual. In the African sense, there is an emphasis on me as part of a collective, me as a sum of many experiences that I've had with other people that have guided me, inspired me, taught me things, and maybe even hurt and disappointed me, because that also becomes part of who I am. So it's both an individual understanding, but a collective practice. So if I don't know myself, that means I know very little about where I come from. And where I come from means more than just 1 or 2 generations ago. And this is important to say in this country, because in South Africa, because of our political history, many people cannot count many generations back. Some can count, 1 generation, maybe 2, maybe 3. And from there, it's very few who can go further. And that's not just unfortunate or a little bit sad. That's actually a human crime, because the reason it is like this is that it's a result of the many layers of oppression, the many layers of secrecy we had to have because of the invasions, the apartheid, the enslavement, that made us a people that didn't have time to focus on teaching generations after generations who are your forefathers and foremothers. So not knowing that is not just unfortunate. Not knowing that makes you less. It makes you to walk as if you have less of history, less importance. You move differently in your daily operations because of that. So there's a huge chunk of power that becomes inaccessible because we don't know we could call it very basic things, because now I'm just talking about being able to say who's your grandmother, for instance. Not being able to say that, it gives you, it dents you, it stops you from something, it makes you less of that full person and that knowing of yourself. So knowing yourself is, of course, not just about the past. We're supposed to know more about our past so that we can understand where we are in the present, but then in order to invent the future. And I see many young African people today who struggle with future, struggle with the concept of future, meaning there's a lot of risky and dangerous and quite destructive behavior that young people know that if I do this, I might not even survive, I might not even live, I might not even have a good life. For instance, we know about HIV, we know about alcohol addictions, we know about nyaupe, we know about a lot of things. But the reality that many young people are living now, which is a result of where we come from or what we don't know about our past, is so harsh that a lot of young people are actually saying, I'm not sure if I really want to be sober, because the reality is so harsh. Marginalization affects me in such brutal ways that being alive and being awake and just confronting it and being with whatever is around me is too harsh. I need to escape. And if drugs can do that, if alcohol can do that, if having lots of partners can do that, I'm gonna do that. And that in itself is also a symbolic act to say future doesn't really exist. So the way I behave now is a result of what I've learned about my past, but it's also a clear indication of how I see future. And when we have a generation of young people, and I'm not saying it's every single body, but there's many that I come across who struggle with future. And if we have a generation of people who struggle with future, it also means we're not going to do so much to invent, to bring back, to create what future must be. And that raises question, who will we end up being when we know that we're not happy with what we see now? Is it going to be even worse?